Okay, good morning, Point Grey students. Morning, Ms. Blair. I'm just going to ask for everyone right now to just put their phones away, because that's the respectful, houndsy behavior that we have, right, when people are speaking. And it brings me great gratitude that we were able to host this event today at Point Grey Secondary, stəywəte School. And I know that all of you are going to look forward to hearing about each of the authors' journeys today. And I really hope it inspires you and just ignites your passions. And we're so excited to have the panel here today, and we welcome our authors. And Ms. Broadland is quite instrumental in planning this event, and we want to thank Ms. Broadland. And I'm going to let Ms. Broadland take it away and introduce the panel.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Holly Broadland, and I am the Teacher Librarian here at stəywəte Point Grey Secondary School. And I'm so honored to be here on the stage with these wonderful authors at the end of Anti-Racism Week and celebrating Asian Heritage Month. I was approached by wonderful Sasha, the teen librarian at the Vancouver Public Library, just 10 days ago. 10 days ago. To say, hey, we have this wonderful event coming together, but we really need an audience, and it would be great if we could have some students to come. What if we held it at Point Grey? And I thought, what an opportunity. How amazing to have a great audience like these folks here in front of me. I can't miss out on that. So we've run around, and I appreciate all of the time from support of teachers, students, admin, librarians, tech support, everyone, to make this happen on a really short time schedule, because I think this is so important. Being able to be represented, to share your story, is life-changing, and I love this work, and I'm so glad that you have the opportunity to be here today and listen to the authors. So I won't take too much time, but I just want to say thank you for being here, and thank you to our authors.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for welcoming all of us into your school today. My name is Sasha Schertzer, and I am one of the Teen Services Librarians with the Vancouver Public Library. And it's very, very exciting to be here today to bring you this panel. And I just really wanted to say, on behalf of the authors and the BPL, thank you for bringing us in. I also really, really want to extend my thanks to Ms. Broadland, Ms. Blair, and all the VSB and Point Grey staff that have made this happen. It was a whirlwind, and it's very, very exciting. To start, we would like to acknowledge that this program is taking place on the ancestral unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and that unceded means that this land was never sold or given away. So we are here today to listen and participate with 4 incredible YA authors as they discuss their creative journeys from how they got started and where they see themselves going in the future. Judy I is a #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Book of Tea duology, A Magic Steeped in Poison, and A Venom Dark and Sweet. Nafiza Azad is the author of The Candle and the Flame, The Wild Ones, and Road of the Lost. Sarah Su is the author of young adult novels Made in Korea and The Space Between Here and Now, as well as the co-writer of John Cho's middle grade novel, Troublemaker. Tessa Barbosa is the author of The Midnight Blade, her debut novel just freshly out this past March. Sabina Khan, the author of What a Desi Girl Wants, Meet Me in Mumbai, Zara Hossain is Here, and The Love and Lies of Roxana Ali, was also supposed to be here with us today, but she was unable to make it, and she sends her regrets, but she knows that you are all going to have a fabulous time with the rest of the panel. All of them have taken very different paths to becoming published authors, showing that there's absolutely no right or wrong way to do this, to achieve your goals. So I look forward to our time together, and I hope that each of you will find the inspiration to pursue your goals through their words. So I'd now like to pass it over to Judy and the panel. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We're so thrilled to be here, and I'm happy to be chatting with these fabulous authors today, and at the end also to welcome any questions that you have as well if anything comes up during our discussion. So please feel free to save those for the end, and we'll be happy to chat with that further. But today, so the title of the panel is Letters to My Teen Self. So I wanted to take this time to talk about our journeys of where we got started in our writing process when we were your age, and then to to many years later when we have our published books. So when I was growing up, I never had an author visit my school, so that's why we're just really excited to be chatting with the teens that are hopefully reading and enjoying our books, and hopefully inspire you to be writing your own stories as well, now and in the future. So I will start off with the first question, and for our panelists. So I would like to know, what age did you start writing? And what did you write? So we can start with Nafiza, since you have the mic.
It's great to be here. It's great to actually see real teens and not the ones we made up in our head. I grew up in a sugarcane farm in Fiji, and there was not much to do there. There was no TV until 1997, and before then, all we had were books, and even those were infrequent. So we would tell stories to each other. We would talk about the myths that we knew and the myths that we made up. We call them myths. And writing was actually a very natural progression for me from after reading a lot. But I started writing very bad poetry before I even started going to school. My mom was a teacher, and she was like, you must learn to read before you go to school. So I would write stuff like, cows go moo, and I would call that a poem because, I was a kid, everything walked. So yeah, I started writing very early.
Hi, I'm Sarah. And I also started writing quite young. I knew I wanted to be an author ever since I was maybe in grade 4. I love writing, I love books. I was like, yeah, when I'm older, I'm going to write books. But for the time being, I actually started with short stories. I don't know if anybody knows Neopets. It's like a virtual online pet site where you have these virtual pets that you take care of, kind of like Tamagotchis, I guess, online. And they had this thing called the Neopian Times, like a newspaper. And I used to write short stories for the Neopian Times, about my Neopets getting up to all this hijinks and going on these adventures. And then I started to discover the world of fan fiction. So I started writing fan fiction. I don't know if anyone here is a fan of K-pop at all, but I love K-pop ever since I was a teenager, so I would write a lot of K-pop fan fiction. And then I dabbled in some spoken word, dabbled in some nonfiction, and then eventually landed where I always wanted to land, which was novel writing. It was a way to get there, yeah.
Hi, I'm Tessa, and I think the first time I actually started to write a story, which I thought would be a novel, was when I was 7 years old. I had a couple of friends, and we were playing this game in the schoolyard, which was about mermaids running away from this evil shark queen who happened to be the schoolyard bully. And me and one of my friends decided we would be the writers, and our third friend would be the illustrator. I think we got about 5 chapters in, and I wrote all of it before I stopped. But I still have those pages, and maybe one day they'll turn into a middle grade story. I still want to do it sometime, because it's like whenever I think about my elementary school days, it's still tinted green and blue, like we're underwater. And so there's just a lot of memories there. But after that, I didn't write for a while until I was a teenager, and then I also discovered fan fiction. This was way before AO3 or fanfiction.net. And it was about a series of books. Me and a bunch of friends were reading, and we would take bits of stories and sort of continue them from each other. And so I never actually finished a complete story, but together we wrote about maybe 500,000 words. So that's more than 5 novels worth of writing, which is a lot and also so much fun.
Wow, I love that so many of us started writing with fan fiction, because I also wrote a lot of fan fiction but later in my writing journey, that was actually what brought me back to writing. I played a lot of Dragon Age and Mass Effect video games, and I wrote fan fiction based on that. So it's really wonderful to hear other people having like similar experiences too, with how we're inspired by other types of writing or video games or different types of storytelling mediums. So that's where it would lead to my next question. I would like to know, what was the book or the author that inspired you to become an author? What was the one that said to you, oh, this might be something that I'm interested in pursuing?
My family was not actually very big on reading, and I'll get into that maybe a little bit later. But they watched a lot of movies, and one of the movies I think made me want to write my first actual novel for myself was Robin Hood, the cartoon version with the fox. And also then later on, maybe the Kevin Costner version. And I just wanted to write a story for myself that was full of adventure. I mean, get to do archery, but do it gender bent. So Robin goes to save her best friend, Marion, and then runs off with Will Scarlet in the end.
I think for me, one of the most influential books as a kid in my road to becoming an author was actually a book I never even read. So I was a student, I don't remember quite what age, maybe grade 8 or so, and I walked into my school library, and there was a book on the shelf, and it was called A Single Shard by Linda Sue Park. And I remember just seeing that book on the shelf and seeing her name, Linda Sue Park, and thinking, oh, that's a Korean name. And it was maybe my first time ever really seeing a Korean name on a cover of a book, in like a book written in English, like in my school library. And I think it just blew my mind seeing that a little bit, like, wow, if she can do it, I feel like I could do it too. So up until that point, I knew I wanted to be an author, but I don't think it really felt real until I saw that, because I think seeing Linda Sue Park's name was kind of like the flame that sparked the candle in a way. So I think I still think of that moment as a very pivotal one, even though I never actually ended up reading that book. And I think from the outside, if you were just to see the scene from like a bird's eye view, it's just like a kid walks into a library, looks at a book, and then leaves. It's like such a very brief moment, but to me it was a very, very pivotal moment. So I think of Linda Sue Park a lot as like a trailblazer for Korean writing.
Similarly, for me, I was actually asked to go to this, while I was doing my Master's of Arts in Children's Literature, I was asked to go to this girl's thesis defense, and she had written a novel, because in the program that I did, you can write a novel as your thesis, and I was sitting there, and I was listening to her talk, and I'm like, I can totally do this better than her. And so, but the book that actually sparked in me the passion to write seriously would be I Live the Unseen by G. Willow Wilson. Because in that book, one of the characters is a hijabi, and she, for so long, I had thought that my people, or the community I'm from, we don't see many Muslim authors, and I thought we were the ones reading the book instead of being in the book. And just reading that book gave me pause, let me to think, I can write characters who also wear hijabs, who are Muslim and proud of it, instead of being, always apologetic for what everyone else has done. So that was the pivotal moment for me, thinking that I can write books, and I can write books with Muslim characters who are having adventures, using magic and being as best as they can be.
I love all of those responses. Thank you so much for sharing that. and it's just so wonderful to hear about what kind of lit that spark for us, and how important that seeing ourselves on the shelves really is, and to see somebody with a similar background as us, and that we are able to tell our own story. So I think that's so powerful. And so that is what I am curious about as well, is that what was the first story that you ever completed, and what was that about? If you want to share, just tell us a little bit about it if you remember. Or maybe you've written so many that you can't.
Does this include the Neopets and K-pop?
Yes, tell us about the Neopets if you want.
Well, I think the first one that I ever completed, actually, I still have it. It's a short story, I should say, and I wrote when I was in kindergarten. It was called The Girl and the Dog. And they have a snack, and they throw a ball around, and then it ends. So it's very concise, and I'm still waiting for that book to take off. I think one day I'll send it to my publisher. But that's probably the first one that I wrote and still have. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of short stories, a lot of fan fictions. I don't think I started writing my first book until I was in my last year of university, though. So I would say that was that time that I started writing my first ever novel. It was a middle grade, so for ages 9 to 12, fantasy book about a Korean fairy world. So I never ended up publishing it, but that was the book that I signed with my literary agent with.
I'm going to skip the school stories because they were not that good. But actually, the first story that I got published, I just decided that I really want to actually try to get published. And so the first story that I wrote actually did get published, and I think that was kind of a fluke. But it was a story about this horror story about this girl visiting her family in the Philippines and getting body switched with the ghost of her dead cousin. So it's fun. It's a good read. I might not be able to find it anymore because I think it's out of print, but it's one of my favorite stories.
I will skip my immature stories as well because they're not worth talking about. But the first novel I finished was actually my latest published novel, The Road of the Lost, and it's about a creature, a girl called Cree, who initially starts off the book as a brownie, and then things start happening to her. I call it express puberty because she grows up in about 2 weeks. The same amount of growing up in 2 weeks that it takes us 10 years or so to do. And she, one day she wakes up and her bones start waking up and she starts changing shape, literally. And then she finds out that everything she has known to be true was actually a lie. So she goes through the story, goes on the road of the lost, and then finds out who she is. And as she does, her voice changes, she grows breasts, and she has a crush on someone. So it was a fun read, and it let me experience the whimsical nature of childhood.
Yeah, I always love to hear about different inspirations that people have, different stories that they've completed, and that's always fun to hear. And while we're talking about some of the first stories that we ever wrote, can we discuss, was your family ever supportive of your writing? What did they think, or did you kind of keep it for yourself, or did you share your writing a lot with them?
For me, my family, we are Pacific Islanders, we're very laid back. So my family knew that there was something I was doing in the hours I spent inside my room alone, not wanting to be disturbed by anyone. So they were pretty good. I mean, as long as I didn't get in trouble, they didn't really care. So I guess they're supportive.
I think for me, my parents knew that I wanted to be a writer growing up, but I would say that they were neither supportive nor unsupportive about it. They were not like, oh, I want to read what you're writing, or you can do it. It wasn't that, but it also wasn't like, no, you can't do that. You have to be this other thing. So it was kind of like this like middle ground where it was like, okay, we'll see if that really happens, like that kind of thing. But I think that as I grew up and as I saw that I got more serious about it, like I was writing these short stories, trying to get them published in like magazines and blogs and whatnot. I remember my dad saying this to my sister, because of course he would never say it to me directly, like, oh, I think maybe she might be able to really do this. And then I remember at that time, I had this chair in my room. So I was living with my parents. I had this chair that I had ever since I was in like elementary school, like a green chair from IKEA. And just like, you know, when you think of a chair with rolly wheels on the bottom. And then I remember I had this chair for years and years and years. And then one day my parents came home with like a nicer chair from Costco. It was like it had like this like back, like this big black like armchair kind of situation. And then they brought it to me and they're like, a real writer needs a real chair. And I think that was the moment where I felt like, oh, okay, like they're supporting me. And that meant a lot. Yeah.
It's amazing to see all the different reactions from our family. Mine, however, was not supportive at all. There was a time when I was young in elementary school, and I just loved to read. And like I mentioned before, they were not into it. Like my dad only read nonfiction, and so both of my parents didn't quite get it. And so they're like, fiction is kind of just like watching TV. It's like eating junk food. It's not really a good use of your time because you're not learning anything. You're just escaping into some fantasy world or something like that. So they actually banned me from reading for a while. And what I did instead was I would just hide my books and I would read like under the covers or in the bathroom and pretend to take a shower and like turn the water on and waste a lot of hot water. Ruin a couple books because they fell into the bathtub, but I still read, and eventually I think they just gave up on it. And when it came to my writing, sort of the same kind of idea. I just kept it to myself because I know one of the things in the back of my head was always this judgment, like they wouldn't want me to embarrass the family or to talk about things that they don't approve of. So even until now, until my book came out, I didn't even really talk about writing to them. And my parents barely knew that I had a writing career that I was working towards for the last 10, 13 years. And my mom only kind of sort of realized that it's kind of a big deal to get a book published when it was out, and other people were congratulating me, and she's like, what is going on? So now I don't know if she's turned around at all, and I still worry about the judgment, but she's been making her friends buy my book. I don't think that any of them have read it, and I don't think she will ever read it, which at this point I think is probably a good idea. And as for my dad, he actually died before the book was published. So I don't know what he would think about it. I think he would be proud of me, though. But still, growing up, there was not a lot of support, so I had to find it in writer friends and like on community online, which sort of changed my life.
Yeah, so you can always see that there's a great range of experiences with how everybody gets started with their writing journeys. But you can see from all the books that are on the stage, though, that they all persisted, whether they had supportive families or not, in pursuing this career and in continuing to tell their stories. So I would love to hear what inspires you to continue to write today and to continue to create your stories and to write more books to share with the world.
I feel like for me, inspiration and motivation looks different every day, and some days it's definitely more than others. So I never feel like it's like a constant well of inspiration I'm drawing from per se. But if I were to think about what does motivate me to continue to write books, especially after the first one comes out, because I think that there's a feeling of like I've always wanted to publish a book, and then you publish a book, and then now it's the next book and what to think about after that. So I think for me, the biggest thing right now, I think, is just this deep-seated need to like create something, or like to create art. And I think that for me, it really goes back to feeling like I just want to make art, and I want to be creative, and I want to be an artist. So even, for example, I watched a lot of movies in theaters this month for some reason. There's just like a lot of movies in theaters. I saw Guardians of the Galaxy, which I loved. I saw Suzume, which I also loved. And I watched the Super Mario movie. So all very different films. But I loved that they all kind of, it like sparks a conversation, if you will. Like, you know, afterward, my friends and I would like go and sit down. We would like talk about the movie, what we liked about it, what we didn't like about it, the music choices, the art, the actual story. And I just love talking about that kind of stuff. And I love being immersed in story. And I think, just really want to be part of that conversation in a way, like the artist conversation. So people are making such cool stuff in the world, and I want to be part of that. So I feel like right now, that for me is probably the biggest inspiration, is just the deep-seated desire to make something and be a part of that community of people that are also making things.
Okay. I'll give it to you very frankly. I feel like it's the only thing I know how to do. It's the only thing people would actually pay for me to do. So I write books. But what inspires me is the voices in my head. I know people usually wouldn't admit to hearing them, but I do have voices in my head, and these voices are of characters who want to be out on the page, and if I ignore them, they will get very cacophonous and annoying. So I write stories. Some of the stories will never become books, but if I have them out on page, they're no longer inside my head. So that's the inspiration. And there's also this desire, this drive in me to be someone and be something, prove all the haters wrong. So I guess there's that too.
Okay, so for me, I think that writing is the way I sort of process the world and my emotions. And even if I never got published, I would still be writing just for myself at the end of the day, turning all the bad things that happen and the good things that happen into stories, or like into something different. I think self-expression is really important, and that creativity, it needs an outlet. And so stories are one way. I also do like some arts and sewing and other things. I just have to constantly be creating something. But as for being published and why I want to write more books, I kind of just write for my teenage self, or the many selves I used to be. And if I can make that person feel a little bit less lonely, or feel like they are a little bit more lovable, then I have done my job.
Thank you for sharing. I love all those responses of what continues to inspire us and to keep going. And Tessa had mentioned that you had other creative outlets, so I'm curious too to hear if other than writing, do you have creative outlets that you pursue?
I like film photography. So when I was in high school, I took a darkroom class. I learned how to use a darkroom and develop film and everything. I don't have a darkroom now, but I still really enjoy taking pictures. And yeah, I don't know. I like nature. It's like going for walks. I feel like nature is very creative. So I get a lot of creative energy from trees.
I embroider, and recently I've gotten into growing roses. I don't know if that counts as creative outlet, but those roses, they take so much work to just coax a bloom out of them. Oh my God, it's like having a kid. But yeah, I also go for walks, and I spend time with my niece and nephew who are 8 and 10, and I feel like that's a creative outlet because, you know, listening to their stories and trying to figure out what they're actually talking about is an art itself.
I guess I kind of already answered this, but before I wanted to be a writer, I actually was an arts kid. So I did a lot of like painting and drawing growing up, and I even did a minor in fine arts in university. And that's something that I kind of left aside for a long time, but I would like to get more back into it. And also sometimes I like sew my own clothes or bags, but that's a more practical sort of thing. It's kind of like meditation when you're just at the sewing machine because you have to pay attention. Otherwise, everything's going to get bunched up weirdly or like not come together in the correct fashion.
Because I asked this question because lots of time you hear the advice, like, if you're a writer, you should write every day. But it's not necessarily the case. As you can see that we all have our own creative pursuits, and we all have things that like fuel our creative well so that we can keep writing stories and doing the work that we enjoy. But it's not all writing all the time. So I have a few quick fire questions then to talk about how everybody also approaches writing and have different writing routines. So it's basically just like say whatever comes to your mind. So the first one is an easy one. Do you prefer to write in the morning or the night, or what time of day?
Whenever I have free time, I have a day job and 2 small children, so they occupy a lot of time. So even if I get like a 10-minute break, I'll just like zip to my computer and just jot something down really quickly. But then even if you're not actually typing words down, there's a whole lot of time that is actually still writing, which is like daydreaming or like thinking about things in your head. So by the time I actually get to sit down at the computer, I actually know what I'm going to be writing about, and it goes so much faster.
I want to say morning. I'm a huge procrastinator though, so I end up writing at night.
I agree with Sarah. I have all intentions when I sit down at my desk to write, but somehow it's either midnight or the wee hours of the morning before I put the first word to the paper.
And what about music or no music when you're writing?
I usually listen to music that doesn't have any words, so instrumentals, so that because if there's words in the song, I will definitely stop and start singing along. So
Also instrumental or no music.
No music.
Oh, so very different from everyone. And what about your favorite drink when you're writing? What do you like to drink or like to eat?
Lately I've been kind of obsessed with sour cream and onion chips. Also hot drinks, so like tea or coffee or just even hot water with honey. Just something hot and comforting, and chips.
I love hummus.
That's very succinct, just hummus.
I actually don't eat or drink while writing, but before I start, I need to have some coffee to get the brain working.
Yeah, and then so the last about our writing routines, where do you write? Do you have a set place or do you have different places?
I actually very recently wrote in a coffee shop. It was like my bucket list because all writers write in coffee shops, and for the first time I actually did it, and I got like very bad words, but I usually write alone in my room.
These days I have started writing at my kitchen table because it gets the most natural light in my apartment.
I write at my desk that I use for work because I'm usually pretending to be at my day job when I'm actually writing fiction.
This is being live streamed. So that's great. Everybody has their own routines, and they kind of figure out what is the best way to kind of jumpstart their inspiration as well. So I also have these follow-up questions about, we talked about our inspirations, what started us to write, and how we continue today. But if you could say anything to your teen self now, what would you tell them?
Stay stubborn because you know who you are. Even those weird, awkward, or creative parts that you don't really appreciate right now, you will someday. And your only job is to be yourself because there's only one of you in the whole world.
I would tell my teen self You're allowed to be kinder to yourself, and nobody, not even the person who you think most has it together, knows what they're doing. Nobody knows what they're doing, so you're gonna be okay. That's what I would say.
I would tell her that the world has room for her brand of weird and that it's going to be okay. No matter how much you think the world is going to collapse in the next second, it's going to be okay. You're going to be fine, so stop overreacting.
Oh, I love that. And what advice do you have for teen writers today? What would be the tip that you give anyone in this audience if they are interested in pursuing writing as a career?
So fungi have this period of absorption where they will absorb every nutrient they can find before they become mushrooms. So you are in your fungi absorption period, so absorb as much as you can, live life as fully as you can, and once you have all those experiences, you can put them to paper.
I would say that nobody can write a story like you can write, even if it's an idea that feels done before, or if it's a concept. Nothing is new under the sun, but no one can tell a story like you can tell. So really, hone in on your uniqueness, your own type of weird, as Nafiza was saying. And also just read a lot of books, I would say. Read whatever is fun for you. It could be anything, could be nonfiction, poetry, YA, fiction, fantasy, whatever. I would say just read a lot, because I think reading a lot gets you used to the rhythm of the words, and you kind of, you start to learn the dance of it, I feel like, when you immerse yourself a lot. So read and be weird.
Kind of similar to those last two, but expanding on them a bit. When you're reading, it helps to read a lot of different things. So don't just stick to one genre, which is your favorite. You can try all different ones, mysteries, romance, thrillers, because when you read everything or the same books that everybody else is reading, then what's going to come out is the same as everybody else. So you want all these things to sort of marinate and come together in your head, and to create something new. And just like Nafiza said about this is your fungi period, you have to live a little bit of life to actually be able to write about life. So don't be afraid to, at this point, writing every day is probably not the best, but just live and experience life and try to see what it's like to be a teenager, and just remember that for when you're older and you actually want to write down.
Thank you for that. Lots of great tips for aspiring writers. And now we're going to kind of give you a sneak peek on what we're working on next. So if you want to talk about, you have a book coming out, or what your next project will be.
I'm not sure I'm allowed to talk about it. I don't know, but I have this book that my agent has, and hopefully we can sell it this year. It is, again, it's a horror. This book that I have out is not a horror, it's a fantasy. But the other book that I have is sort of like a dark fantasy horror about kaiju versus Frankenstein. And I don't know, I think it's fun.
Definitely want to read that. For me, I have a book coming out this October on Halloween, actually October 31st. It's called The Space Between Here and Now. It's a young adult novel. It is about a girl who has a condition where when she smells something linked to a memory, she briefly goes back in time to that memory. So it's about her trying to figure out why she keeps going back to certain parts of her life and trying to live more in the present. So I'm really excited for that to come out. It is all done, and it's just, waiting to go out in the world. So I hope that some of you will check it out and that I can talk about it with people soon.
I actually put on the cap of an editor this time around, and I have an anthology coming out that I edited. It's called Writing in Color. So if you are an aspiring author, and if you are a writer of color, you would benefit from this nonfiction collection. It collects 14 authors, essays from 14 authors of color who detail their experiences, their journey into publishing, and they give great advice, and some might make you cry. And I'm also working on this rom-com that is set in Fiji in 1998. It's called When Razia Meets Rizwan, or When Razia Met Rizwan. It's about me trying to write romance, which I'm not very good at, but I'm attempting it.
Lots of exciting stories to look forward to coming up for our authors here. And now my next project. I have a book coming out next year that's a fantasy, which is called Song of the Six Realms, and it's inspired by Chinese mythology, but it's more about like immortals and the connection between poetry and music, and it's very much inspired by my love for Gothic fiction. So about discovering that you are actually in the celestial realm. So I have that book coming out, and then I also have a horror coming out next October, where it's set in Vancouver's Chinatown. So it's about a girl who discovers that her sister is being possessed, and she has to save her before it's too late. So I have those two books coming out next year. But I wanted to leave lots of time for questions. So if there's any questions from the audience, we would love to answer them.
How long did it take you to write your books? Like, do you have to take a break between writing them to sort of look at them in a new light? Or are you able to write them really quickly and then later edit?
Okay, so my first book, I actually wrote it, the professor told me I couldn't do it, so I had to prove a point. So I wrote it in within like 4 months, simply because she told me I couldn't do it. But usually it takes, if a book is under contract, if you have already sold it, then they will give you like 3 or 4 months to write it. And then otherwise you can take, it usually takes me around a year to write a book because I write very slowly.
So the book I'm working on right now is taking a very long time, but I will share the kind of the process for The Space Between Here and Now, which is coming out this October. So I sold it on proposal in November. And on proposal means I just had like 3 chapters and like a synopsis. So from November to April, like 4 or 5 months, I wrote the first draft. Sent it to my editor, and then from April to August, we sent it back and forth a few times editing it. So I think we did maybe 3 or 4 major revisions. So if anyone doesn't know about books, they do go through a lot of revisions. So it's not just that you write a book and then it goes out onto print, you revise it a lot. So we revised it 3 or 4 times, and then it goes to a stage called copy edits, where it's kind of a more nitty-gritty, like line by line, and that kind of finished around fall as well. So I would say in total, the whole process takes about a year for me, from like kind of the idea, first few chapters, to getting it really polished and pretty much ready for publication, with the first draft taking about 4 to 5 months, I would say. That's kind of been my timeline, except for this book. Again, this book is kicking my butt. But yeah, that was generally how long it takes. And then between books, to answer the second part of your question, I personally am a writer who can really only focus on one idea at a time. So I have a lot of writer friends who have like thousands of amazing, brilliant ideas because they're amazing, brilliant people. I'm also a brilliant person, but a much more like slow, in a slower, brilliant way perhaps. So it takes me a long time to ruminate on an idea. I would say actually the conception of the idea is probably the longest part for me. So even as I'm writing it throughout the year, I may be starting to think about the other idea, but very vaguely, and then it takes me quite a long time to put that together.
I would say that, yes, my first drafts take about 4 months-ish, which is, it's kind of like 1,000 words a day, which is maybe like 4 or 5 pages a day. So it's doable. However, usually after the first draft is done, if I'm not under a contract, I will let it sit for at least a month before going back to look at it again and fixing it, because it's very broken at this point. And then after that, then I would send it to some friends or like beta readers to have a look at, and then go through it all again, however many times I think is necessary. So there's actually the writing of it, or the first drafting of it, is like the fun part for me, and it's pretty quick. But the actual getting it into publishable shape can take a long time.
And I'm like the complete opposite. I hate drafting, but you can't edit an empty page, so it's what I always tell myself. So it actually takes me longer, but I have more fun in the revision process. So yeah, you'll find everybody kind of figures out their own method and their own writing practice. So is there any other question?
Hi there. I was wondering if when you write, do you have like other forms of employment at the time, or have you needed to in the past? For example, if you're writing under contract, will the publishers provide essentially living funds while you write that book? Or in the past, if you haven't had the same connections in the industry, you haven't gotten those contracts yet, do you find you've worked other jobs at the same time or gotten other ways to sort of essentially fund your writing before you can get any returns on it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually worked full-time. I am an occupational therapist. I guess I didn't talk about my experience, but my parents were not supportive when I wanted to be a writer, and they said, you need to have something where you can like feed yourself. So I went into, they wanted me to be a doctor, like surprise, surprise, but then I went into healthcare. But that's what I did, was I worked full-time, and then I wrote in the evenings and on the weekends.
I would say that making a living as an author full-time is very, very difficult to do, especially if you don't have like support or somebody else with another income to help you. So one of the best pieces of advice that I got from actually one of my high school teachers was to do both. I told him that I was doing computer science in university, and I really wanted to be a writer instead, and he said, just do both. So now I am doing both, and my day job sort of funds my writing at the moment, and hopefully someday I will be able to leave that day job, but I actually kind of like it. And yeah, so I think most writers actually have either a spouse or partner with money, or else they have a day job.
I think this is a really good question. And for me, I did this thing where I just had a lot of different jobs. So I didn't just have like one full-time job. I just had a lot of different things that I was constantly doing. So I felt like I was always doing like 3 or 4 different like contract jobs or side gigs, some writing related, some event related, some admin related, some totally random related. So I was just constantly doing a lot of different jobs. I think there's a term for this called gig economy is what I've heard, where you're just kind of like doing a lot of gigs. So I was doing that for a really long time. And then it kind of came to the point where it was like 90% other jobs, 10% writing, and then the writing percentage just kind of went up more and more as I was writing more books and selling more contracts. So yeah, I would say that that's kind of how I went about the employment and money route, was largely having many different jobs as well.
I am privileged to be living at home, so I don't need to pay rent. But I too, like Sarah, did a whole lot of many small jobs here and there. I would proofread, I would tutor kids, and work a weekend, 2 weekends, or go to a temp agency and do work here and there before I actually sold a book. And then I started getting paid the advance, which is not really much. But as I said, I live at home, so I don't have to pay rent. And food, my parents cook, so I eat there. So that's that's saying something. But yeah, if you're going to go into writing thinking you're going to earn lots of money, the truth is you're not. You really are not. It's unless you hit it big, and that could happen, totally happen. But if you you'll start off small, and then as you sell more books, you'll get a reputation, and then you'll be able to ask for more.
I guess to address that second part of your question about how they pay you, writing is a very strange business in that they pay you, and if you're traditionally published, they pay you in advance. So that kind of gives you money to like either if you still on proposal to work on your book, or pay you for the book that you're like for the revision process you're working on with the editor. But the advance can vary to like a couple thousand to maybe to astronomical, like 6 figures. However, it's broken down into different periods. So even if you sell a book for like $30,000, for example, that seems like a lot, but then they split it up. So when you first sign the contract, you get paid for a third. Then when you hand in your finished draft, you get paid a third, and then when it's published, you get paid a third. So it might be $10,000 every year over 3 years, right? So really, you can't live off of that. So it varies so much depending on your deal. So that's why you cannot really rely on your book in advance to feed you while you're working on your project. Get the next question.
Hello, I'm curious, how was the process of publishing your first book? How difficult was it to get it published?
The trick is to get an agent. So as Canadians, we do not have, I found out that we do not have as many literary agents in Canada as they do in the US. So oftentimes, if you're serious about becoming an author, you will have to write query letters, which is basically writing a letter telling this agent what your book is about and trying to sell yourself. So you can send, some people are very lucky, they get it in their first few tries, and some people have queried more than 300 agents, and then still they don't get anyone saying that they want to publish you. So once you get an agent, and if you get a good agent who knows the job, who knows the business, and who has connections all over, you'll be able, if you're lucky again, because you think querying is bad, when your book goes out on submission to editors, and you have these very nicely worded rejections where they'll start off like, your book is amazing, and you have so much talent, but we can't publish it because for whatever reason. So those would be your main obstacles, getting the agent and then the submission.
I would say that there's not a lot of guarantees in publishing, but I'll say there's two things that will happen to you if you want to pursue publishing. The first one is that it's very unpredictable. So for some people, it will happen very quickly, and for some people, it will take like 10 years. So I think that that's just kind of the randomness of the industry. You don't know. It's about the quality of your work, but it's also about timing. It's also about, did it go to the right agent or the right editor at the right time? I think there's just so many factors that are out of your control. So it's a very unpredictable job and industry. So to answer the question of like, was it hard? Yes. Whether it happens fast or long, I think it's very hard and challenging. And there's a lot of like mental game you have to play with that around like, you don't really know how long it will take and what it will look like. So you just have to kind of keep going without really knowing in a sense. But the best thing you can control is just putting your best work out there and continuing to write your stories. So I would say that's the first one. It's very unpredictable. And the second one is that you will receive rejections. So it's not a matter of like, oh, if I get rejected, then X, Y, Z. You will. It's only a matter of time. I think I received, between trying to get an agent and then trying to sell a book, I think I received over 100 rejections. So I think that is just definitely something to keep in mind, is that this will happen to you. It doesn't mean that you're a terrible writer. It doesn't reflect on you and your stories or your ideas or your creativity. It's just a fact of the matter, is that's what's going to happen if you pursue publishing. It will be very windy and it will be filled with rejections. However, it's also really fun. It's also, I would say, that's why I think to really believe in the stories that you want to tell and to have people around you to support you, whether that's online community or friends or family or whoever you may have, is very important. So the answer is it really varies, but whatever path you're on, you're really not alone, is what I'll say. So even if it takes you a really, really long time, like, why is it taking me so long? Why is every door closing in my face? Like, you're not alone. That's very normal and just a regular part of the industry.
I'm one of those writers that took a very long time. So I decided I would like a writing career maybe 13 years ago, when I wrote a whole bunch of really terrible novels. The Moonlight Blade is actually my 5th novel that I wrote. The second novel that I tried carrying, the first one died. And in hindsight, I'm glad it never got published. But this one, I started writing it in 2016, and what happened was that I did get an agent, I think in 2017, and we went on submission in 2018, and then we sent it to a whole bunch of editors together, and it died on submission. And then my agent left agenting, and I was just without a book career all of a sudden after I don't know how many years it had been at that point. So I just took the book, I put it in my drawer, or like the trunk, as writers like to say, and I forgot about it for a while. I wrote 2 more books, and then the movie Raya and the Last Dragon came out, and I saw some editors asking for, does anybody have a book with like similar vibes? And it's like, whoa, I have one. It's like doing nothing. Why don't I just send it in? So I sent it in to a publisher that didn't require an agent. 3 months later, I had a book deal and a new agent to help negotiate that book deal. And then 2 years later, it was published. So it took a very long time, and like just as Sarah mentioned, that sometimes rejection is just a matter of timing, and it's not that your writing wasn't good.
So you can see how it is a process that has a lot of starts and stops, it feels like. But I guess the one thing I want to say is that you do need to have a finished story. That's the one thing you need to have before you can pursue at least traditional publishing. So that's why I always encourage aspiring writers, is that you just have to learn how to finish writing a book, and then the rest you can worry about later. But really finishing, I feel, is the hardest part, and actually is still the hardest part for me, is finishing the book. So that's something that you can always work on before worrying about the rest. The next question.
What are some tips on tackling writer's block?
Writer's block. Good
Writer's
question.
block. Okay. Maybe this is controversial, but I don't really believe in writer's block. But I do know that there are times when writing is hard or it's not coming, and it's usually because I'm burnt out or I'm depressed or something else is going on in my life that's making me stressed out, so I can't create. So the key is to figure out why you can't be writing at that point in time. Is there something else going on? Do I need to just take a break and do some more self-care and just like fill myself up with stories, like watch movies, listen to music? And so, yeah, usually it just means that, you know, life is hard, and sometimes it does get hard and you can't write.
So that's where I'm at right now with my curve. So I'll share a little bit about like where I'm at right now in my life. So I'm working on a first draft right now of a brand new project, and I think that I have a few reasons as to why I'm really struggling with it. I think part of it is just I'm trying a lot of new things, like new tense, it's a lot more plot focused, whereas my previous books were a little bit more character focused, things like that. But I would say that the biggest thing for me, and also I mentioned earlier, like I'm a huge procrastinator. And the reason why is because I feel like it's not going to look the way that I want it to in my head. And then seeing how different it actually looks on the page makes me not want to do it. I think that's kind of the feeling that I have. It's like I have this huge grand vision in my mind, and then I see what I have on like my Microsoft Word doc, and I was like, that is so not what I want it to be, and it makes me like not want to work on it in a way. So I would say that the tip for that, and the tip that I just keep reminding myself like every single day these days, is it's just a first draft. Like it's just a first draft. All a first draft has to do is exist. That's like the very essence of a first draft. It just has to exist. So it could be the worst thing in the world, but that's what revisions are for. That's what all the editing that we talked about is for. So that's what I'm telling myself. And I think another thing that I'm kind of telling myself is like it's really just one sentence at a time. So I think the second part of why I procrastinate a lot, why I get so overwhelmed, is because like I have to write a whole book. Like this is like thousands and thousands of words. This is so much. But I think when I just focus on like I just have to write like a sentence, or even just I just have to write the next word, and that's all I have to do. That's literally all I have to do. So I would say my biggest tip for any kind of block or feeling like struggling or overwhelmed is really just take it one step at a time and like make it the most minuscule tiny step, because that still matters. Because at the end of the day, what is a book but not just one word at a time, one word after another? So sometimes it can feel really overwhelming to tackle the whole novel, but it doesn't feel quite so overwhelming to just think of the next word. And it could be literally the worst word you've ever thought of in your entire life. Like, this is just not at all what I want it to be later, but it's okay, because you're just you right now. And chances are it's not as bad as you think it is anyway.
Similarly, for me, the Microsoft Word page is very intimidating. So I write all my books by hand, and which means that I don't have to stare at the blank page, which seems to stare back at me and says, try me. So I write in a book, and then you can't count, I don't count the words I've written, so I fool myself. I've written a lot for today, so it's done. But one of the things that I do when I really can't write is just I put it away. I don't force it. Unless, like my deadline is the next day, then I'm in trouble. But I just put it away, then I go for a walk, or I go watch a movie or a K-drama, or listen to some songs, and then sometimes when you don't think about something, that's when inspiration will hit you. So don't force yourself, just let the words come as they will.
Yeah, so lots of great tips there for writer's block. So any other questions?
I know for some movies, actors will get a little bit of.
Please excuse this interruption. Track and field athletes competing at the BC.
Thanks, Mr. Scars.
There is a match today at 11:40 in the small gym for these students: Massimo Artesani, Sophia Cervantes-Caseno, Aries Chow, Marcus Chow, Becky Evans, Hugo Fletcher, Theo Gould, Jack Harris, Angelina Hahn, Christina Emery, Adriana Lando, Austin Lee, Anya McNaught, Allison Torrance, Mason Van Ramstonk, Valentina Silva, Henry Wang, Tammy Wong, and Yu Xuan Wu. Please be on time. Thank you.
Okay. So I know with certain movies, maybe all of them, I don't know, actors or voice actors will get a little bit of money every time that is used, the movie's played or whatever. Do authors get a little bit of money when their books are sold? Or is it like you give up completely?
Okay, so those are called royalties. And yes, if you have a good agent, they will negotiate with the publisher to make sure you get royalties after your book earns out. What it means is that the publishers will subtract the amount of money they paid you, and then once your book has earned enough for them to do that, then you'll start getting royalties. It also happens that every time you take a book, here in Canada at least, if you take a book out from the library, the Canadian government, the Canada Arts Council, they have this program, the public lending right, and they will send you some money at the end of the year because people read your books.
Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, and then you do get some royalties, and then you also get money if you sell like translation rights, for example. So when your book is translated, you get a little bit of money from that. And there's a couple of different or if somebody wants to make your book into a movie or a show, you might get a little bit of money from that. So there's a couple of different streams where you can earn additional money after you've sold your book. Okay, so I think we have time for maybe one more question, or are we out of time?
Thank you so much, Judy, Tessa, Sarah, and Nafiza. That was really fun and really inspiring, and I hope that everybody checks out their amazing books, and also Sabina's, because they are also in the library, even if Sabina is not here with us today. And then I also just really wanted to thank Raincoast and VPL and VSB, especially Miss Broadland and Jeff, for getting everything together for today and bringing us all together for this event. It was really, really wonderful. right, so I know that all the books are in your library, so go see Miss Broadland over the next few weeks before you are dismissed for the summer. This is a very good summer reading list. And go have lunch. Don't faint. Have a good day.